The agenda this week explored the state of volunteering in Canada and, more broadly, considered what it means to be generous. Let's have a look. A number of years ago, Robert Putnam wrote a fascinating book called Bowling Alone.
Yeah.
For those who don't know it, what was it about?
Yeah, it was fascinating. It's almost 20 years ago now. It'll be 20th anniversary next year. He was a sociologist, and he was looking over the post-war period in the U.S., and he was trying to uncover in data the qualitative feeling that something had changed in America, something qualitatively had changed in America. And so his first idea was, people don't bowl anymore. You know, this was a cultural institution, a social institution. He asked his RA to go down and look at the data. He brought back the data. It was the same rate. The bowling rates hadn't changed. He said, that's not possible. There's no way, right? Laverne and Shirley, I mean, the 50s and the 60s, you know, this
Archie Bunker,
they all came from the bowling alley. What had changed was the way in which bowling had happened, and that's the title. People weren't bowling in groups anymore. They weren't bowling together as part of workplace teams or neighborhood groups and friends. They were bowling alone. They couldn't find their friends in a way, and that's because of the changes to the structure of American society, which happened in twofold. The American labor market changed. It lost all these institutions that supported the regular 9-to-5 job, baked in time when you know you had leisure, and so did all your friends. You know, Fridays, work ended, you had a weekend, and almost days when nothing else happened but leisure. So that was dismantled. Plus, he looked at the more sociological aspects, the changing nature of society from a collective, we were doing things more together, to doing things more individually. There was this funny statistic that was buried in that same General Social Survey, that public pools were the #1 leisure activity for Americans in the 1950s. By the 1970s, 1 in 10 people were going to public pools. Why? Because they had private pools and didn't want to sort of mix together. So there is this feature of North American, perhaps, life that's most captured in that study, which somehow Canada mirrors, and it's the sort of decline in the social institutions, the things that bring people out. Now, volunteering has this quasi-individual and communal aspect. You want to go as a group, you want to go as a family, you can do it by yourself. But I think it links up to this. You know, we're seeing a somewhat disquieting pattern, albeit the data is still a bit old, but a decline in volunteering. We've seen declines in other social activities, and we have to keep our eye out that things that are changing in our society, changing in our labor market, aren't causing these other negative effects. So I think we have to buttress society, encourage the social aspects that make, I think, our societies cohere better, and repair the labor market where we can, because this is going to harm society more generally.
I want to find out from Joanne, do you think people are bowling alone in the volunteer sector now?
We see a strong continued engagement in volunteerism, but we do see a shift in some of the reasons for volunteering, right? With 1 in 2 Torontonians arriving from somewhere else in the world, people are volunteering, because they want to connect with community, but because they want to develop local experience. So we do see an increase in people who are volunteering for need, we could say, but that trend doesn't diminish those who are volunteering because they want to.
Do you see that at the Daily Bread Food Bank?
Well, maybe just outside of the Daily Bread Food Bank, you know, I was thinking about places of worship. So, you know, people got together, you know, on Saturday or Sunday, once a week, as a group. We still have that intrinsic desire to hear a sermon, but we watch it on our phone on a TED Talk, and so we're kind of making it a little bit more individualistic. No, I think with the Daily Bread Food Bank, though, it's about community. It's about, you know, when you have hundreds of people, you know, every day there's about 150 people, 150 volunteers that come out and they sort food together and they laugh together. There's always great music at the Daily Bread Food Bank.
What are you playing?
Well, it depends. For you, we would ask you, and we would have you DJ that day.
All Sinatra all the time. How would you define generosity?
Well, you know, I really think it's about going outside of yourself. It's about thinking of time, talent, and treasure. And as soon as you kind of move outside of what you need as an individual and start thinking about the other, that's generosity. I mean, I also think it's around kind of measuring the health of our society, of our community.
Anthony, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's generally considered to be a virtue or a habit of, you know, using your resources for the benefit of other people for its own sake.
Pat, how about you?
I would say it's when an individual does something, incurs some cost upon themselves in order to confer a benefit upon somebody else.
A cost meaning?
Time, money, resources, anything.
How much of a role, this will seem like a bit of a question out of left field, maybe not to you, but
Yep.
because this is your field, how much of a role does genetics play in whether or not a person is generous?
Well, humans have evolved to have the capacity to be generous. So our genetics contains that ability to be able to empathize with others, which many species do not have to the same extent. And also, given that the environment affects how our genes are expressed, it allows us to be able to learn to be generous much more so than any other animal.
Do you find that a bit odd, given that we're all about the survival of the fittest at some point? And I mean, we're here today because we've learned to be nasty buggers, right, over time?
That's what most people think when they take a glance at evolution by natural selection. You think nature red in tooth and claw, this very vicious view of evolution. But when you look around, you see a lot of cooperation in many, many species because cooperation often pays. Whether it's one individual helping a close relative who might carry copies of the same genes for generosity, or whether it's some sort of I scratch your back, you scratch my back reciprocity, it pays to be nice because then that affects how others interact with you. So nice guys can indeed finish first.
So Leo DeRocher was wrong. Nice guys don't finish last.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and it depends on the environment, whether it pays to cooperate in that environment or not.
That was a baseball reference for all of those who
Nice guys, finish last.
who don't remember Leo DeRocher. Okay, Teresa, with that foundation in place then, what is the thought process one goes through to determine what to give, how to give, all of that stuff?
I think the key element really is the first word that you mentioned around thought process. It should really be, what's the impact that you want to have in your community, in your country, in your world, and how can giving or generosity help you get there? I think oftentimes, we'll talk about this a little further on, but there's increasingly sort of a movement towards ways of giving that are maybe a bit more transactional, online, quick gives. You're kind of losing, I worry a little bit that in that we're losing the rational thought process on intentionally how we want to give, what the impact is we want to see.
Because apropos of what was just said by Pat, there's no cost to us if all we're doing is just a click?
Well, a click is not, it could go deeper than that.
Meaning?
I think it should. I think, I think if we're talking about how we encourage empathy in ourselves and in our next generation, it's not going to happen just by nature alone. I think that a nurturing is really a strong requirement here.
Anthony, let me read this to you and then get you to react to it if we could. This is a quote from social psychologist Dr. Sarah Conrath, who's from Indianapolis. And in one of her recent studies, she looks at the generosity of time versus money. And here's what she found. Older adults who give their time, whether by volunteering for a nonprofit or helping a friend, are more likely to be alive several years later than those who don't. Giving money doesn't have the same effect. Research finds that it might make people feel good in the moment, but it doesn't help them live longer. This may be because it's easy to write a check or click a box online, but giving time involves giving more of yourself. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. We talk a lot when we talk about giving, we talk about money and similar kinds of resources, but we forget that there's also other resources that we have, like time, that we can use to give to our community. And when we give time, obviously, we're lending our expertise and our talents and things like that. And given what Pat said, it would be unsurprising if you are giving, that it's also beneficial for you to do it. And so you would imagine that giving to your community in that way, being active intellectually, mentally, and physically, would have those benefits for you.
And that's just some of what we covered this week on the agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can always visit our website. That's tvo.org, our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed. That's twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.